Mason Rudolph is back in a Steelers uniform on a 2-year deal. With today's guest, I'll explain what his role will be with the Pittsburgh Steelers during the 2025 season. That's next on the Bleav in Steelers show. Today's episode of the Bleav in Steelers show is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. March is here, which means the madness comes with it. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Now, let's get to today's guest. All right, Jarrett Bailey is here. He's an NFL writer for the Sporting News and also part of the Bleav family, hosts the Pump Fake. Jarrett, welcome in. And we've got a lot of Steelers news to talk about. And Pittsburgh still looking for a quarterback in the 2025 season. But Mason Rudolph is coming back. It's good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, you too, man. According to many on Twitter, they're done looking for a quarterback. Yeah, they got Mason. That's all they need. Yeah. So it's, I don't know, man. I think a lot of that it's silly. Like, I like Mason, but I think a lot of people just need to slow the roll a little bit.
What was your initial reaction when you saw this news yesterday?
I was happy. Like I said, I like Mason. Like, I'll always have a special place for Mason Rudolph in my heart because he saved me from another year of Kenny Pickett. So like he'll always be like, just personally speaking, playing the 4 best games of his life, leading to the Steelers being like, all right, yeah, we can probably do better than what we currently have. And then signing Russ, and then that leads to Pickett being traded to Philadelphia, Fields coming in. So like, I'll always appreciate Mason Rudolph for, at 7-7, he comes in, has like no hyperbole whatsoever, one of the more like iconic Steelers games of the past like decade, just coming in against Cincinnati 2 days before Christmas and balling out. And then they win their, those 3 games, go to the playoffs. He plays well against Buffalo. I think he's the perfect backup, the perfect, like a high-end backup who, was with the Steelers for a long time, came in when Ben got hurt, started a bunch of games. So like, that worst case scenario, if you got to play Mason, you can still win. It's not going to be the prettiest thing in the world at times, but that he's capable of the occasional like big game like he did against Cincinnati and Seattle. So I'm cool with it. I think he's the perfect backup and the perfect like break in case of emergency if something does fall through with Aaron Rodgers. And then you just roll with him for the year. That's fine. But I still do think it'll be Rodgers for 2025.
We'll get into the here and now and his role with this team for this upcoming season.
Yeah.
I view what happened at the end of the 2023 season through a little bit of a different lens. If I'm hearing you right, if I'm hearing you right, it's like it was a precursor to get rid of Kenny Pickett at the end of 2023 with how he played?
I think so. Okay. Remember all those reports that came out before the Seattle game that Pickett refused to dress because he was pissed that they were playing Rudolph again.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people since then, Jerry Dulac of the Post-Gazette being one of them, have come out like shortly after the Pickett trade and confirmed like, yeah, that happened. And they did their best to, keep it behind closed doors, which the Steelers are good at doing in terms of keeping any sort of like dilemmas in-house. And so I think that was a little bit of a precursor. If he doesn't play out of his mind against Cincinnati and they do go back to Pickett, maybe they don't go out and get Russ ahead of last season, and maybe Pickett's stuck with the Steelers through 2024. I think that Mason playing well was the first domino to fall in terms of moving on from Pickett and starting over. So I wholeheartedly believe that.
Fascinating perspective. I see it through the lens of after that Saturday night game against the Colts, which was Trubisky's final start.
Yeah.
Where the Steelers were left for dead and Mike Tomlin was staring his first losing season square in the eyes. And it's like, this team is done. It's not going to make the playoffs. You have to win 3 straight and get help. Mason Rudolph came in, and I just remember the body language of the skill position players, like i.e. George Pickens. It's like, good things happen if you chuck it down the field and you throw it to George down the field. What a concept.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a lot of guys who, were on the team when Mason was there are happy. Pat Fryermuth posted it on his Instagram story. So I think that he's, pretty cool with Mason coming back. I'm sure George is happy to have Mason Rudolph back. I think a lot of guys in the locker room will be happy to have Mason back. I'm looking forward to, talking to him a little bit during OTAs, mini camp, training camp this coming summer, and just, picking his brain on why he decided to come back. But I would assume a lot of guys who were part of that, little month-long run are happy to see number 2 back in the locker room.
Yeah. I mean, look, as a backup, that's where I see him being best.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any chance he's the starter for the team, though? Like, say you strike out on Rodgers, you strike out on Wilson. Is there a world where Mason Rudolph is the Steelers starting quarterback for the 2025 season, like week 1?
I think that if they don't sign Rodgers, like if something falls through there where he, shocks everybody and decides to go with the Giants or even like the Vikings, if that's, something that happens, or if he just retires, I think they just roll with Mason and they'll bring in somebody else to be the number 2. If they wanted Russell Wilson would be there. I think it's very clear. And I've talked about it for the past few weeks where I think that, and credit to Alan Saunders over at Steelers Now and a bunch of those guys for reporting that, like, he legitimately angered some people because of the situation of his relationship with Arthur Smith coming to light, which felt like a very obvious leak from his camp to try to save as much face as possible to make him look as good as possible going into this free agency period. And he legitimately angered some people in the organization to the point where I think that they kind of let that ship sail and don't want him back. As soon as Justin Fields signed with the Jets, if the Steelers really wanted Russell Wilson, he would be a Steeler right now. So I think that ship has sailed, and I think that if Aaron Rodgers doesn't get signed, he signs elsewhere, he retires, I think they will go with Mason as the starter, because who else are you going to bring in that is capable of doing so right now? I think that they've put their eggs in the Aaron Rodgers basket after Fields signed with the Jets. Fields, it was widely reported they wanted to bring back Justin. The Jets just offered more money than they were willing to, which, however you feel about that, I have my own thoughts about it, but, this, that, and the other. So I think right now it's going to be Aaron Rodgers or bust. I think, like I said, Mason Rudolph is very much like the high-end backup, break in case of emergency, and the emergency being Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign. So I think those are your 2 options right now for the Steelers starters. Either going to be Rodgers, or if they don't land him, it'll be Mason. They'll bring in somebody else to be the number 2.
Wilson met with the Browns on Thursday. He's scheduled to meet with the Giants today on Friday, March the 14th. And I'm curious to see if Wilson tries to be the next domino to fall, because right now things at the quarterback position are at a bit of a standstill because everyone's waiting on Aaron Rodgers. Why is it taking so long for Rodgers? Like, this is what I'm trying to figure out of, like, could he have not foreseen free agency shaking out this way? Because there's only going to be a handful of teams that are even interested in bringing him in. I just don't understand why this is taking as long as it is. Like, it's not that difficult to think about.
I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be inside the head of Aaron Rodgers and know exactly what he's thinking.
Dangerous place to be.
Yeah. And look, I think that there is something to him, enjoying the attention a little bit. Whatever. I think everybody, to some way, shape, or form, has a bit of an ego. His might just be a little bit bigger than others. Whatever. I'm not gonna, judge him off that. If you want to be annoyed by it, I get that. You just want to find out who the team's starting quarterback is going to be. Totally get that. I don't know. We went through this very similar thing a couple years ago when he was pondering his future, whether he's going to retire, whether he wanted to go elsewhere. Goes on McAfee, says he wants to go to the Jets. They get it done pretty quickly. So hopefully it doesn't take that long. In terms of making his decision, hopefully we know, today would be great. We're recording on March 14th. So hopefully it we get news today that he decides what he's going to do. But like I said, I'm not going to pretend to know what's going through his head. Obviously that picture came out of him on the beach, like wrapped in a blanket, just listening to music. Looked cozy, looked great. But hopefully we know sooner than later, so we don't have to keep talking about this and speculating.
Yeah. I think the Steelers are a better team with Rodgers at quarterback than Rudolph, but I'm going to throw this caveat in there. Mason Rudolph at $4 million per year versus whatever Rodgers ends up signing for at the age of 41. I've had a lot of people in my mentions where it's like, yeah, let's roll with Mason. That's one thing this past year where the Steelers have totally zagged on the quarterback market. I think Mark Bergin put this out there where pretty much every starting quarterback in the NFL who is not on his rookie deal makes at least $20 million per season. So the Steelers, if whether it was Rodgers or Wilson, if that's still a possibility, they might end up paying more for the old men, one of the two, than they would have if they just would have signed Fields. I do want to ask you about Fields, but okay, so I think we're in agreement where Rodgers would be, at least in terms of a talent standpoint, an upgrade from Rudolph. Again, for what price is up for interpretation. If the Steelers miss out on Rodgers, you're left with Mason Rudolph, Skylar Thompson. Would the Steelers go to the draft? Would they go to another veteran quarterback out on the free agent market, like maybe a Jameis Winston? What happens if Rodgers goes to another team that's not the Steelers?
I would like to see them make a move for Joe Milton, Patriots backup. They just signed Josh Dobbs, former Steeler. Jordan Schultz reported that the Patriots are open to trading Joe Milton. And I think the move for Dobbs basically says, yeah, we're going to trade Joe. Like we gave Josh Dobbs backup money. He's going to be our backup. And with the way that he played in Week 18, granted, he knows against largely, Bills backups and whatnot, but even with that grain of salt, he goes 22 of 28, throws, I want to say it was the fastest pass all season, where he scrambles around for legitimately like 10 seconds and then fires, I think it was like 62 mile an hour, like just dagger to the front left pylon of the end zone. So like there's obvious upside and talent there for him. The only thing with Milton coming out of Tennessee, it's that he didn't play in an NFL system whatsoever. It was screens and go balls. And his accuracy was very inconsistent. But in terms of the athletic upside, the legitimately like top 5 arm in the NFL, just in terms of power, incredibly athletic. Like there's a lot of traits there that you'd like in a young quarterback. So I think that trading for him, and in this situation, if Mason Rudolph doesn't play well, you can turn to Joe Milton and say, all right, we can see what we've got here. I don't want to go the Jameis route, dude. Like, let's not do that.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to deal with is Jameis Winston and his annoying quotes. Like, that's another thing. I know I'm going to get on a soapbox here about Jameis Winston, but oh my goodness, I am so tired every time I open Twitter seeing somebody talk about Jameis Winston. Oh, he's so quirky. No, he's not. He's annoying. All the we don't have to pretend that it's funny. It's very much like over the top phoniness, annoying. I'm tired of it. And if that is what ends up in Pittsburgh, I'll be furious. So hopefully it's not Jameis Winston. I think that making a move for a guy like Joe Milton makes a ton of sense. There's not like a lot of like backup options left even. I'd have to go and look, but I know that Kyle Trask just re-signed with the Buccaneers. Like they're running low on even those calibers of guys. So I think that a quarterback room in this situation, if Rodgers doesn't come, of Mason Rudolph, Joe Milton, Skylar Thompson. Joe Milton, I think, would be given like somewhat of a chance to at least compete for a starting job, but it would be Mason's job going into camp in the regular season. And that if Mason plays poorly, we saw it back in 2018. If Mason plays poorly, they went to Duck Hodges. I think a similar situation where you go to Joe Milton if you don't like the way Mason Rudolph is playing.
Yeah, that 2019 season where Hodges started out as the 4th stringer as an undrafted rookie, and they had traded Dobbs to the Jaguars. How you feel about Winston in another potential 30-30 season with Winston is how I feel about the possibility of, do you trade something for Kirk Cousins? That's exactly how I feel, where it's like, you know what you're going to get. Like, I know the Steelers aren't going to win a Super Bowl with Mason Rudolph as their quarterback.
Sure.
I think he could probably get you to 9 wins, though. I mean,
we saw it happen before.
Could he play much worse than he did in that 2019 season? And then again, at the end of 2023, he seemed to be figuring some things out. People might look to what he did in Tennessee, 1-4, filling in for an injured Will Levis. Tennessee had a lot of problems. Tennessee's got the number 1 pick for a reason.
Yeah.
They just signed Dan Moore Jr. to a 4-year deal, $50 million guaranteed. What is it?
Crazy.
$82 million. So it's like, Tennessee has a lot of issues that they need to address. So Rudolph, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm glass half full there. Milton, though, I saw him. I was boots on the ground at the NFL Combine a year ago. Dude has a cannon. I mean, the analogy I'd make to you is like you're throwing a football through a car wash and it doesn't get wet. We're talking about that caliber of an arm.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the Senior Bowl last year, like I was excited for him to be there just because, all right, he doesn't even have to play. Just stand at the other end zone and see if he can throw it to the opposite end zone. Just
flick
show
of the
me,
wrist. Just a flick of the
show
wrist.
me some just insane arm strength. That's all I wanted to see. And he showcased that at the combine last year. And again, he's got those traits of a young guy that you like in a modern NFL quarterback. It's just honing in all of that from, a raw prospect to make it NFL quality. So, improve on the accuracy and, lean into what he does well, which is be, athletic with his legs and extending the play. I think that there's a lot to like there. It's just a matter of honing in on it and, turning it into something that can be an NFL quality product.
I try not to fall in love with the one game sample size. I think about way back in the day, the game that Matt Flynn had, and then the Seahawks gave him a huge deal and a huge contract. So
which he never played on, by the way. They started Russell Wilson after doing that.
Yeah. So I wouldn't want to give up away that high of a draft pick to trade for a guy like Joe
I think
Milton,
if the Patriots were like, if you give us a 6th round pick for Joe Milton, I would do that in a heartbeat. Yeah.
Done.
Yeah.
Done. I would do that. I'd do that in a heartbeat. If
I would rather them do that than draft like Tyler Show or some other quarterback in this draft class that isn't going to be much of, like, no disrespect to them, whose ceiling is
there in a second. We'll get there in a second.
Yeah.
I would consider that even over signing Rodgers or Wilson to, again, like at this point in the market, are they going to make, I don't know what that figure is for, like, if you had to pay Rodgers $40 million a year, even if it's for 1 year, it's a lot of money.
And I hear you on that. I do. Especially when the argument is, okay, you can use the rest of that money to sign really good free agents. The problem is that the Steelers, they had money last year to do that and they didn't really do it. So I get that side of the argument, but I also don't know if I trust the Steelers to spend that money on quality free agents that are left because they didn't do it last year. So Rodgers gives them the best chance to win games. I think you're a 10-win team with Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. You're going to be in a position to win a playoff game the same way you were last year. With Mason, it's going to look, I think, somewhat similar to 2019, not to that degree, because I think he is better than what he was in that season. I think the weapons that they have with DK and George Pickens fit what he can do and fit what the offense wants to do. I think Arthur Smith wants to be the 2019, 2020 Titans, where it's just going to be run the ball, play action, launch it. And Mason has the arm to do that. Even with Calvin Austin there as the 3rd or 4th guy, he's shown the ability to get vertical and make plays downfield. So I think they want their passing game to be a little bit more bombs away. And we saw that with Russell Wilson last year. So I'm not I'm fine if Mason's the starter. I just don't think he's gonna be. I do think it will end up being Rodgers. And if it's not, then that's fine. Roll with Mason for a year. We'll see what happens. Fans, but it's incredible the complete 180 fans have done on Mason Rudolph since 2023. Because I remember being in attendance for the first playoff game after Kenny Pickett got drafted. Mitch Trubisky came in and started. Everybody's like, oh, yeah, all right, Mitch. And then the second quarterback to come in was Mason Rudolph, and everybody in that building booed him. And now all of a sudden, everybody's like, start Mason week 1. He's the answer. I'm like, where the hell was this back when you guys were bashing everything this guy did?
Dude, that 3-game into the 2023 season.
It's amazing what that can do.
It was a total 180. It was a total 180. And I remember there were Steelers fans calling for him to start because of how poorly Trubisky played. And remember, Trubisky, though, was making $8 million a year, and Rudolph was on whatever the minimum was. And it's there's your answer for why they're prioritizing which quarterback to play. And Trubisky had every opportunity, but Mason came in and there's not a way to quantify this, JB, but I am telling you, man, the body language of everyone on the offense, it was yo, finally we have someone who can stretch the field based on the other 2 guys and Trubisky and Pickett, who just point blank weren't getting it done. I tell people this too. Pickett in his 2nd year, I know he was injured. I know that's part of that, but he had 6 total touchdown passes. Trubisky, for as bad as he was in Pittsburgh, he did that in 1 game when he was still in Chicago.
Yeah.
That's how bad this offense was.
And it was so this is such the absolute rock bottom of my fandom and covering this team. He had the lowest touchdown percentage in NFL history for all and it's not just quarterbacks who have thrown 10 passes where it's just a trillion guys. It's good 500 passes. That's a lot of guys still. and he had like a 1.8 touchdown percentage amongst all of them, which is the lowest amongst all. Like, it's absolutely crazy just how ineffective Pickett was. And yet, if you said that, you'd have like, somebody with the Twitter name like Pitt fan forever 007 with a Pickett avatar coming in your mention saying, well, actually, like, dude, shut up. He's not good. And so I think that a lot of guys in the locker room recognized that he wasn't the answer. And, maybe they saw something that we didn't in Mason during, whatever it may be, practice reps or whatever. They're like, all right, thank God we at least have a guy who's going to sling it. And he did. And if that's what they get this year, like, all right, here, I'll pose this question to you. If Mason is the starter, 17 games, what's the stat line look like for Mason?
Like 3,000 yards, maybe low 3,000 yards, something like 18 touchdowns and maybe 10, 12 interceptions.
That's kind of where I'm hovering right now. Like, I think, hold on, let's do some quick math right here. This is great. This is great for the podcast listeners.
Yeah, live math on the air. Here we go.
So let's see. So 3,000 divided by 17. He would only need 176 yards a game to do that. I think he'll get a little bit more. I think if we go like
3,200-ish.
Yeah, I think between 3,200 and 3,300 is a little bit is good. And if he has 20 touchdowns, cool. If Jaylen Warren and the rest of the running game look good with, Kenneth Gainwell, whoever the other running back is that they're going to add in the draft, I think that that's all in all pretty successful year for Mason Rudolph. If he can be a 20 touchdown thrower this season, if the Steelers can keep everything at bay with DK and George Pickens, more specifically George, who's like more prone to like on-field crash outs of just getting irritated, then yeah, I like the potential of what it could be. I don't think it's going to be a top 10 offense, but could it be like the 17th ranked offense in football? Sure. Why not?
I want to see this offense get a first team All-Pro. It's been since 2017.
Wow.
AB, Le'Veon Bell, David DeCastro. So it's like this offense has just been dormant. Like, that's why I like the DK trade, where it's like, attention, PSA to the rest of the NFL, at least for the 2025 season, the Steelers have two studs on the outside. Like, you would think that, like, everyone's supposed to love to play for head coach Mike Tomlin. It's like, well, where was that? I want to ask you about Fields. Should the Steelers have matched the Jets' offer to retain Fields? I'm of the thought process, yes, but like going into the offseason, Jarrett, I was like, whether it's Fields or Wilson coming back, I thought those were the two most likely options. You're going to be about the same as you were a year ago, maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse. But do you think the Steelers should have made more of a push? Because from what I've read, the Jets had the most money to offer Fields. He goes to the Jets, a franchise that hasn't made the playoffs in 14 straight years. What say you?
I would have. And, I'm obviously probably the more like one of the more outspoken Fields guys amongst like the Steelers fan base. So like, I get that I'm a little bit more headstrong on that than most, but like people are saying, I don't know if Fields is worth $20 million a year. Like, look at what other dudes are making right now. Like Daniel Jones just got $14 million. I think Justin Fields is $6 million at least better than Daniel Jones. We got Chase Young, and I know it's a different position. Chase Young gets 3 for 51. He's making $17 million a year. I think Justin Fields is $3 million more valuable than Chase Young. So like, I understand that on the surface, it feels like a lot of money for a starting quarterback. $20 million is pennies. And the fact that the Steelers got cheap with it, it really irritated me because like notoriously, they have become one of the cheapest organizations in football. And if you need any example of that, last year they signed Patrick Queen to, what was it, 3 years, $43 million or something of that nature. The 3 for 44, regardless of what it was.
The figure is, yeah.
Regardless of what it was the largest external free agent signing in the history of the franchise. It was $14 million per year. So it's frustrating because, fans, and I'm not sitting here saying that Justin Fields is a top 10 quarterback. He's certainly not. I think his ceiling, if put in the right situation and the right offense that suits him, which I think the Steelers offense did, especially after the DK trade, I think his ceiling could have been, being the 16th or 17th best quarterback in football. And I think that wasting that, and instead of just paying the 26-year-old who you could have found out, all right, we'll give this guy a year to see if he can be the future of this franchise as the full-time starter. Like, he played well in the 6 games that he started last year. We'll give him the full year to see if he can be our long-term answer. Now, instead of doing that, you're more than likely going to bring in, 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers, who isn't going to be the long-term answer. and then more than likely try to find that long-term answer in 2026, which is fine. But I think it would have made more sense to go with a young guy and see if you would even have to draft a quarterback in 2026 rather than, all right, we're absolutely going to take a quarterback in 2026 now, or we're probably going to have to trade up to do it because we're not going to lose enough games to be in position to just take one. So I think it would have made the utmost sense to bring back Fields, who, from the sounds of it, is going to be a lot cheaper than what Aaron Rodgers is going to be. So it feels like they've just kind of shot themselves in the foot, penny pinching, and it's going to end up costing them more money anyway.
Well, you talked earlier about the 180 everyone did on Mason Rudolph. What about the 180 the entire league did on Fields?
Yeah.
The Steelers got Fields a year ago for a 6th-round pick. And now it's like everyone's like, oh, $20 million a year. And whether you think that's too much or not enough, you are exactly right, Jarrett, when it comes to the market value of quarterbacks. You are spot on of what a starting quarterback costs in the NFL. And I would make the argument, too, that for those first 6 games, the Steelers had the handcuffs on Fields not to turn the ball over. That was his biggest criticism coming in. And I would also argue he was running Russell Wilson's offense, not an offense tailored around his skill sets.
Yeah.
And that's not me being hindsight 2020. Mm-hmm. Russell Wilson was a captain. He was named a captain before the start of the season, before the calf injury. So clearly the plan was to start Wilson all along. He had his calf injury, so that didn't happen. Sorry, hop in here.
No, and I think that the handcuffing didn't do them any favors because, like, you've got this uber athletic quarterback who, for all the faults of the Bears and not putting enough talent around him, they at least said, all right, Justin, if that first read isn't there and you feel pressure, run. And like that game against the Dolphins, I think it was 2021 or 22, where he has just 2 of the greatest runs you've ever seen a quarterback make. And he's showcasing player make. Yeah. And he's showcasing like, look, man, I am uber talented. Just give me some help. And the Steelers, they didn't give him any help because it was George Pickens and Jarrett Bailey and Mark Bergin playing receiver. And they didn't do a lot to give him a ton of weapons to really help him out in the first place. So, like, if there was any place that he could have succeeded in just, like, taking off after the first read of Pickens isn't open, it was there. And I think that they would have benefited from doing so a little bit more in those first 6 games. And even so, he went 4-2 as a starter. That game against Vegas, where he did a lot of the running in the red zone stuff to help extend the lead, did it. Almost completed the comeback against Indianapolis by running in the red zone. And if George Pickens doesn't fumble against Indianapolis, they probably win that game. If the Steelers defense doesn't give up an 18-play drive to the Cowboys to end the game, they win that game as well. So even handcuffed, he put them in a position to be 6-0 in his 6 starts. And to just piss that away because you don't want to give him $20 million a year, and now you might end up giving Aaron Rodgers double that just makes no sense.
I would have much preferred Fields be the bridge to whoever the next guy is than whatever the Steelers end up with.
Or even
there. Because the market's changed from the start of free agency. Go ahead.
At worst case scenario, he's the bridge. Best case scenario, he takes the next step and you feel like a Baker Mayfield situation where, he bounces around the league, but he finally lands in a spot that suits him. And maybe you get a situation where Fields, you feel comfortable with him being the answer for at least, the short-term future rather than, just going year to year with quarterbacks. If you want to give him, a 3-year extension, like I would have felt, that is the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, then he's a bridge and you find somebody in 2026, but you can at least say you tried something with a young guy who had a lot of upside.
All right. I want to get to 2 things before we wrap here. Is of all the Steelers additions this offseason, which is your favorite and why?
I mean, obviously the DK one sticks out, but in terms of like the free agent signings and whatnot, no, I like the Slay signing. I think I, didn't show that enough a little bit on Twitter because I was still pissed off about the Justin Fields stuff. But I mean, Slay can still play football. Even at 34 years old, like he's still like a very good corner. Transitioned very well into being like the Eagles' number 2 when Quinion Mitchell took off and played really, really well. But I think the reason why I'm still a little bit apprehensive on it, not because of his ability, it's because of the Steelers. Like it's like the 5th straight year they've just plugged the CB2 hole with like a veteran. They did it with Akella Weatherspoon, Patrick Peterson, Dante Jackson last year. I'm probably missing a name. So Levi Wallace. Like now, Darius Slay is better than all of them, which is great. And they also bring in Brandon Eccles, who can contend for the starting nickel spot. So I think that they've paid the appropriate amount of attention to cornerback and improved on that room largely, We'll see if they make any other moves there, whether it be in free agency or the draft. But I think right now, a room of Porter Jr., Darius Slay as your starters on the outside, potentially Brandon Eccles or Beanie Bishop in the slot, and then Corey Trice rotating in. You're in a much better spot than what you were last year. So I like what they're doing in terms of that on that side of the ball.
You're starting to see some of the influence Andy Weidel has in the Steelers front office with Omar Khan in how he helped build the Eagles into a Super Bowl team, bringing over some players from Philly. You mentioned the two in the defensive backfield, but just how the Steelers are building this team with prioritizing in the draft offensive line the last 2 years, getting two beasts on the outside in DK and George Pickens. I will say this too, though, with DK's acquisition, you're paying him $30 million per year. To me, the writing's on the wall where this might be the last year the Steelers have George Pickens in a Steelers uniform, because you're not going to be able to pay two guys a premium. Now, Steelers could franchise tag Pickens in a year. We'll see how that shakes out, but he's making somewhere between $3.5, $4 million this year. Certainly he's worth more than that right now. To me, the writing would be on the wall of, hey, DK's the guy who's going to be here from a long-term standpoint. And to me, that signals that Pickens' days are numbered in Pittsburgh, because, again, you can't pay everyone. You mentioned earlier, okay, well, what do the Steelers do with the salary cap that they have? Well, TJ Watt's going into a contract year. I look at what Max Crosby got with the Raiders, what Myles Garrett got with the Browns. If you're talking about paying him $40 million per year, we all want to see TJ Watt in a Steelers uniform for the rest of his career, but you also don't want to pay for past performance either. So how that shakes out too is going to be fascinating to watch from the Steelers standpoint of, okay, quarterbacks, what we're trying to figure out right now. I still am of the thought process, look, if they go to the draft next year, the draft is in Pittsburgh, so it make for a heck of a backdrop of, I know Arch Manning's the guy everyone wants, but to load up your assets, they're going to have a ton of compensatory picks a year from now of a lot of the players that they lost this offseason. Can you potentially trade up to go get the guy that you need to get? And the last time the Steelers had a losing season in 2003, they drafted Big Ben the following year.
And I think that's what they're gearing up to do. They're getting a 3rd-round comp for Justin Fields. I think they're getting a 4th-round comp for Najee Harris and a couple more late day 3 comps for other players that they've lost. So it screams that that's what they're preparing to do. They know that they're not going to be in position to just draft one, even in a quarterback heavy class. Like if you're drafting anywhere between 18 and 22, that's not prime top quarterback territory. You're going to have to move up.
Yep.
And I think that, there's almost always a situation where a team who you don't expect to be drafting high is drafting high for whatever reason, just a down year or, injuries and whatnot. The 49ers this past year, they're drafting 11th after and I think that was because of attrition just setting in from all the extra games that they've played. They had a lot of injuries last year. I think there's going to be a team like that who doesn't necessarily need a quarterback that you can talk to who's, drafting 8th and be like, hey, we want to get up to 8. What can we give you to move up? And then if you want to move up again from 8, you can do that. So they're gearing up to move up to take the guy to be the potential future of their franchise. As a Penn State guy, hopefully it's Drew Aller. That's what I'm crossing my fingers for long term, looking ahead to April 2026.
Yeah, we're already talking about that before the season.
Jarrett Bailey talking about the Steelers' future quarterback in 2026 on March 14, 2025.
Arthur Motes told this to me, played for the Steelers in the 2010s. He was like, if the Steelers have a losing season, how are the fans going to react? Like, they're going to have to stop playing Renegade at Acrisure Stadium, man. So we'll see. Before I get you out of here, the Steelers have the 21st pick. How do you envision the team uses that pick? I hope they trade back, and then I would get a defensive tackle, restock the cupboard. Cam Hayward's 36. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, if they can trade back and get a 2nd-round pick back, that would be cool. You were talking about George and potentially his days being done. As soon as they traded for DK, I said they're going to trade George. Maybe they don't do it. Maybe they don't do it this year because DK was very complimentary of George in his introductory press conference. He said, I wasn't even going to ask George to take 14. That's his. I'm not going to try to take away from his legacy. So maybe they try and see if it works. But I do agree with you that while they can pay both technically, We've seen the Eagles pay both AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. We saw the Dolphins pay Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Like, it can be done. The Bengals are trying to work it out right now with both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I don't think the Steelers are going to do that. And I think that I would have said it a couple days ago, especially if they were going to sign Cooper Kupp. It looks like they're not in the sweepstakes for Cooper Kupp. So, talking out of both sides of my mouth here. But if there's a way that they could get another receiver that they'd feel comfortable enough with where they can move on from George, then I think that they would do it. But right now, I think that they're looking to hold on to both of them, which means I think it's going to be a defensive tackle in the first round. I think that seems to be the way it's going. It's a very defensive tackle heavy draft, whether it be Walter Nolan, Derek Harmon, Kenneth Grant. If they move back, even if they move back, 8 spots in the draft and get a second round pick back, I'd much rather them do that than not have a second round pick at all. You can still take a defensive tackle in the first round, or if you want to just triple down on and get another receiver if one's there and take a defensive tackle in the second round, you can do that as well. So a lot of different things they can do, but I'm looking forward to it. This is in terms of a defensive tackle draft, it's pretty deep. So like I said, I would expect that to be the pick. But if they trade down and want to take, a Matthew Golden or a Luther Burden, I'm going to be completely on board with that as well, just to keep loading up on receivers, especially if, George Pickens' future isn't going to be a long-term one in Pittsburgh. Have one already in place to take that next step whenever the time comes. So they'll have a medley of options, and it'll be fun to watch here in the next month and a half.
Cannot wait. Jarrett Bailey, the floor is yours for anything that you need to plug.
Follow me on Twitter at JBaileyNFL. If you're on any of the what the hell am I on the other apps, actually, because there's too many apps.
Listen, we will get your social media information in the show notes. We'll make sure that is linked.
On top of that, just read the written work, sporting news, USA Today as well, for the long form stuff. And listen to my stuff on the Bleav network as well. Listen to the Pump Fake podcast, and subscribe to that on here on YouTube. I'm also the same thing, J Bailey NFL on YouTube. Lots of Steelers stuff from me throughout the offseason as well. So follow me and all the billion things I'm doing throughout the offseason.
A man of many hats. He is Jarrett Bailey. I'm Mark Bergin. I want to thank today's presenting sponsor, BetOnline.ag. YouTube, hit that subscribe button, Mark Bergin YouTube page, the Bleav Network YouTube page, and on Apple and Spotify, 5 stars and 5 stars only for the Bleav in Steelers show. We'll be back next week, and hopefully by then we'll have news about what Rodgers is doing, what Russell Wilson is doing. So stay tuned here on the Bleav in Steelers show. Have great weekends, everybody. I will see you next week. Until then, take care. So long, everybody.